What's going on, y'all? Happy Sunday out in the sun yet again. I think that was last week. It was snowing, and now it's this, the good old joys of Colorado sunshine. So wanted to hop on here real quick. Saw Terry's message regarding and think a big intensive day tomorrow, and was unsure as to what to eat and what to prepare himself for. One thing that I think it probably comes from a lot of the publicized stuff that gets thrown around of carb loading, or potentially those kind of things that get kind of set up on the side of really trying to help ourselves get as much energy as we can possible prior to an event. And although carb loading, right, and so what we're talking about is essentially where your glycogen stores, so the things that contribute essentially sugars and essentially glucose and glycogen. So essentially that's what gets stored in the form of carbohydrates, gets stored in your liver and your muscle tissue. Now, there's been research that shows that if you eat an abundance of that prior, the night before or several hours before an event, you can almost upload that bucket so you have a little bit more additional stores available. Now, the big part we get oftentimes, we get that question a lot from athletes, is that the night before their activity or their game or whatever, is should I carb load? And honestly, from my experience, is what we tend to try to do is we try to almost backload the things in which we haven't been able to properly load over the duration of maybe the last days or weeks. And so we essentially, what is that thing? Ladybug, is essentially, we try to make up for it, right? Like, well, I didn't drink enough water today, so I'm going to double up on the water I had in for today. Or I didn't drink enough water yesterday, so I'm going to try to overdo today. And the body doesn't really respond and work that way. It takes, 24, 36, 48 hours for us to actually absorb and store and utilize the things in which we're trying to mobilize and use for our exercise. And so when it comes to the night before, and this is why it comes into the process of taking in kind of your own data, is first off, how do you respond? How does your own internal system respond to eating something right before an activity, right? Like for myself, I've done this long enough where I know if I have something that's an hour or two out, I can usually eat a pretty good amount and I'm okay. But if I eat something within an hour or 45 minutes, my system doesn't tend to do very well. And just because I get a lot of that just sitting in my gut, and when I go into activity, the blood and everything that's usually going to be used and go to my digestive tract is going to be shunted away and going to active muscles. And so then all of a sudden you have kind of just that food just sitting in your digestive system, not being processed as fast. But what we can also see is, okay, if I've been consistent and I've been able to get enough essential nourishment leading up into this event, because that's kind of the balancing act between, obviously, if we're trying to decrease body fat and weight, we are a little bit in I hate restricted. I think you guys understand that by now, but essentially we are in a little bit of a low from what we might normally be giving ourselves. And so if I'm constantly in kind of this low, and then all of a sudden I go to do this longer activity of 30, 45, 60, whatever plus minutes, then all of a sudden that storage and that energy system can be a little bit depleted a little bit. So you can also play around, and usually I don't recommend this until we start to see a certain body fat percentage start to get into. Usually for women, it's usually around 15%. That's when we start to kind of adjust a little bit of the intake. For men, it's usually 10 and under, but essentially you can use what was it's referred to as carb cycling, or what we call it is nutrient shifting. And so essentially you can almost adjust your carbohydrate load and kind of your nutrient breakdown, right? Like I can still eat essentially the same amount of calories, but I can shift to maybe being a little bit more higher carb the day or so before, and then essentially lower carb, higher fat essentially on there. But like I said, wouldn't recommend that for anyone in this group right now. Those are methods and stuff that can be utilized. as we get more consistent with our practices. One thing that I would say, and I think Terry, you said you're working out, I think at 7:15 tomorrow a.m. One thing I would say on there is you can also take advantage of kind of nutrient timing. Okay, so yet again, this is kind of another level, getting in a little bit deeper. But essentially, if you want to really utilize that thermic and high burning effect of really getting into your carbohydrate stores pre and post exercise, is usually an hour or two before you exercise. That's when we want to have a little bit more of your carbohydrate intake, and then also make sure that you're having protein coupled up with that. So essentially that carbohydrate, we're going to increase that glycogen, that glucose storage in our muscle and our liver, and then because I'm having protein coupled up with that, that's going to essentially release what's called glucagon and allow that to open the door and be utilized as fuel. In addition, after that about 15 to 45 minute window after exercise, that's when I can still get a high number of carbohydrates in the system, yet again coupled up with protein, so that gets mobilized and used and not just yet again stored. Is I can utilize that hour or two prior and the first 15 to 45 minutes, hour afterwards, as a way of utilizing my carbohydrate storage. So especially if you're feeling kind of undernourished and maybe a little depleted, and you feel like you start to lose a little bit of energy prior or during your event, is first off, what are you doing prior to that? Because, and also on the same side is what state are we in? Because if we're in a really high, anxious, overwhelmed, nervous state, obviously sometimes that has an effect on whether or not we want to eat, right? And same thing of even if I do eat and I'm in a kind of overwhelmed, anxious state, I'm not in a rest and digest state. I'm in a fight or flight kind of mode. And yet again, my body's releasing cortisol, it's doing all those kind of things, and it's not allowing me to actually utilize the things in which I'm trying to use as fuel. It's just going to go into essentially, I can't utilize that right now because I'm more worried about the activity that I'm doing, as opposed to resting and digesting and getting those things in the proper mechanisms that they can be utilized for. So hopefully this helps. I would say, for a lot of you guys that especially have this maybe all going on tomorrow, is make sure tonight, I do your normal thing. What I oftentimes see is a lot of athletes like, well, I've been doing this one thing and then tomorrow I got my event, so I'm going to change up the whole playbook and I'm going to do something completely different. The body doesn't like that. What it knows is your circadian rhythm, right? Like with the time you wake up, the time to go to bed, what your daily functions are, what the meals that come in the door. Your body likes consistency and yet again congruency to what it knows what's going to happen. So if all of a sudden I go and do something that I normally don't do, sometimes that can throw off the system a little bit, right? Like I always I heard this one a long time ago, but essentially if I was going to go hunting, I wouldn't use a gun that I never fired before from somebody else, right? I want to use something that I've practiced and utilized and put into play that I know is reliable and how I respond to it. So, and not to say that there aren't other methods and other things that can be utilized, but especially before an event or a competition or something you guys are preparing for, do what your body knows what to do. Eat the things that you know that your body reacts to, that responds well to, that allows you to get some good sleep, allows you to have good energy leading into it. Yet again, if you're having something prior to exercising and obviously the nerves might be a little bit up, make sure it's something that you respond well to, that you have easy digestive functions to. I wouldn't eat something that all of a sudden throws a wrench in the system that takes longer to digest. Yeah, I hope that answered the question. If not, let me know what other questions you have. But yeah, other than that, good luck, crush tomorrow, enjoy your Sunday, and yeah, appreciate y'all. Later.